Get on the ground, now! The shout echoed through Terminal 4, slicing through the hum of travelers like a knife. Instantly, the bustle of the airport ceased. Hundreds of passengers froze, turning in unison to witness a shocking scene at Gate A12. An elegant black couple, dressed in unassuming but neat travel clothes, stood surrounded by 3 aggressive airport security guards. Patricia, the gate agent with a perfectly sprayed bob and a sneer etched onto her face, held their boarding passes up like they were contaminated evidence. "I knew it," she announced loudly, playing to the crowd. "Stolen credit cards, fake IDs. You people think you can just waltz into first class." She thought she had caught criminals. She thought she was protecting the airline. But she didn't notice the black SUVs tearing across the tarmac outside the window. She didn't see the 6 men in dark suits sprinting up the jet bridge, hands hovering near their earpieces. Patricia was about to learn a lesson that would cost her everything. By the time the Secret Service stepped in, it wasn't the couple who would be leaving in handcuffs. The morning rush at John F. Kennedy International Airport was a symphony of chaos. Wheels clacked against the terrazzo floors, announcements blared over the PA system about unattended luggage, and the smell of stale coffee mixed with jet fuel. Amidst the frenetic energy of stressed families and businessmen barking into their phones, Marcus and Elena moved with a calm, synchronized grace. They were a striking couple, both in their early 60s. Marcus was tall, with broad shoulders that had not slumped with age, and a beard speckled with distinguished grey. Elena was petite, but held her head high, her eyes scanning the terminal with a sharp, intelligent warmth. They were dressed simply. Marcus wore a charcoal wool sweater and comfortable chinos, while Elena wore a beige trench coat over a linen travel set. To the untrained eye, they looked like grandparents heading to visit family in the Midwest. To a trained eye, one that recognized the texture of vicuña wool or the subtle, logo-less stitching of Italian leather loafers, they looked like people who didn't need to shout about their net worth. "Are you sure about this, Marcus?" Elena asked quietly, adjusting the strap of her leather weekender bag. "We could have taken the Gulf Stream from Teterboro. No lines, no shoes off." Marcus smiled, squeezing her hand. "The G700 is in maintenance, Elle. Besides, I promised the board I'd fly commercial for this leg to check on the new carrier partnership. It's only a 7-hour flight to Geneva. We'll survive the indignity of mixing with the public." Elena chuckled softly. "You just miss the airport pretzels." "I do miss the pretzels," Marcus admitted. They approached the priority access line for Summit Airways. It was a prestigious carrier, known for its opulent first-class suites and strict clientele vetting. Marcus had booked 2 seats in the Residence, the most exclusive cabin on the plane, costing upwards of $20,000 a ticket. As they neared the entrance to the priority lane, a young attendant glanced up from his tablet. He saw 2 older people, calm and polite. He smiled. "Good morning. First class?" "Good morning," Marcus said, his voice a deep baritone. "Yes. 2 for Geneva." The young man scanned their digital passes. The machine beeped a pleasant green. "Excellent. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, you're all set. The lounge is to your right, but boarding for flight SA-409 begins in 20 minutes at Gate A12. "Thank you, son." Marcus nodded. They bypassed the crowded lounge, preferring to stretch their legs before the long flight. They walked slowly toward Gate A12, chatting about their garden back home in Virginia and the upcoming summit Marcus was keynoting. They were invisible in the best way, peaceful, unobtrusive, and happy. But invisibility is fragile. As they reached Gate A12, the atmosphere shifted. The gate was manned by a woman named Patricia. She was in her late 40s, wearing a Summit Airways uniform that was a size too tight, with a name tag that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Patricia didn't look like someone enjoying her job. She looked like a predator scanning the herd for a weak link. She was currently berating a young mother for a carry-on bag that looked an inch too wide. When the mother apologized, Patricia rolled her eyes and slapped a check luggage tag on the bag with aggressive force. "Next," Patricia barked, not looking up. Marcus stepped forward, presenting the 2 boarding passes. "Good morning." Patricia looked at the passes on the counter. First class, the residence. Then she looked up. Her eyes raked over Marcus's comfortable sweater, then darted to Eleanor's simple trench coat. She looked at their skin color. She looked back at the tickets. The calculation in her eyes was instant and icy. "Please step aside," Patricia said, her voice dropping the customer service veneer entirely. Marcus frowned slightly. "Is there a problem?" "We're boarding Group 1. "I said step aside," Patricia repeated, louder this time. She signaled to a security guard standing a few yards away, a burly man named Officer Brock, who had his thumbs hooked into his belt loop, looking bored. "Brock, I need you over here." Elena stepped closer to her husband. "Excuse me, miss. We have valid tickets. Why are we being asked to step aside?" Patricia let out a short, derisive laugh. "Valid tickets? We'll see about that. People usually don't buy $40,000 tickets with cash unless they're drug dealers or they stole a credit card, and you two don't look like tech CEOs to me." The air around the gate seemed to freeze. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "I suggest you check your system again, madam, and I suggest you watch your tone." "Don't threaten me," Patricia snapped, her face flushing. "Brock, hold them here. I'm calling the fraud department. These passes are obviously forged." The commotion had begun to attract attention. Travelers in the waiting area looked up from their phones. A few lowered their newspapers. The sight of a uniformed agent accusing 2 older passengers of fraud was better entertainment than anything on Netflix. Officer Brock lumbered over. He was a man who enjoyed the small amount of power his badge gave him a little too much. He didn't carry a gun, but he carried a taser and a heavy baton, and he walked with the swagger of a Wild West sheriff. "What's the issue, Pat?" Brock asked, chewing on a toothpick. "Forgery," Patricia declared, pointing a manicured finger at Marcus. "And probably identity theft. Look at them. They're trying to board the residence. Do they look like residence passengers to you?" Brock looked Marcus up and down. He saw a black man in a sweater. He didn't see the man who had advised 3 presidents. He didn't see the man whose signature could move markets. He just saw a target. "Sir," Brock said, stepping into Marcus's personal space, "I need to see ID. Now." "I have already shown my passport at check-in," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm. "And at TSA. I will not show it again to a gate agent acting on prejudice." "Oh, we got a lawyer here," Brock sneered, turning to the crowd which was now openly staring. Some people were filming with their phones. "Sir, if you don't produce ID, I'm going to consider you a trespasser in a federal secure zone. That's an arrestable offense." "Marcus," Elena whispered, touching his arm, "just show him. It's not worth missing the flight." "It's the principle, Elle," Marcus said, though he reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted his passport, a diplomatic passport, dark blue with gold lettering, and handed it to Brock. Brock took it, flipped it open, and squinted. He frowned. "Diplomatic courier? What is this fake junk? You print this off the internet?" "That is a government-issued document," Marcus said. "I advise you to handle it with care." Patricia snatched the passport from Brock's hand. She looked at the photo, then at Marcus. "Marcus Sterling. Never heard of you. If you were a diplomat, you'd be flying private or have an escort. You're just some scammer trying to sneak into luxury." She threw the passport back onto the counter. It slid off the edge and fell to the floor. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Disrespecting a passenger was one thing, throwing their documents was another. "Pick it up," Marcus said. The temperature in his voice dropped 10 degrees. "Make me," Patricia challenged, crossing her arms. "I've already flagged your tickets in the system. You aren't getting on this plane. In fact, you aren't leaving this airport until the police run your prints. I bet you have warrants." "This is ridiculous." A passenger from the line, a young woman in a business suit, stepped forward. "He gave you his ID. Just let them board. You're holding up the whole flight." "Mind your business or you won't be flying either," Patricia shouted at the woman. The young woman shrank back, silenced by the threat. Patricia turned back to Marcus, a triumphant smirk on her face. "See? Nobody wants you here. You're disrupting the peace." "Brock, search their bags. I bet we find the stolen credit cards in there." "You have no right to search our bags without a warrant or probable cause," Marcus stated firmly. "This is an airport," Brock said, unclipping his baton. "I am probable cause. Open the bag, old man, or I open it for you." Elena was trembling now, not from fear, but from a simmering rage she hadn't felt in years. "Marcus, call him." "Not yet," Marcus said, his eyes locked on Patricia. "I want to see how far they will take this." Brock didn't wait. He grabbed Eleanor's leather weekender bag from her shoulder, roughly yanking it away. Eleanor stumbled, catching herself on the counter. "Hey!" Marcus barked, stepping forward. "Do not touch her!" Brock shoved Marcus back with a heavy hand to the chest. "Back off! That's assault on a security officer. You want to go to jail right now?" The crowd was buzzing. Phones were held high, live streaming the event. The comments on the live streams were already flying. "Racist power trip. Sue them. Wait until the manager sees this." But Patricia and Brock were too caught up in their power trip to notice the digital storm brewing. Brock dumped the contents of Elena's bag onto the dirty carpet of the terminal. Clothes, toiletries, a book, and a small velvet jewelry box tumbled out. "Oops," Brock grinned. He kicked a silk scarf aside with his boot. He bent down and picked up the jewelry box. "What do we have here? Stolen goods?" "Put that down," Elena said, her voice sharp. "That is a family heirloom." Brock popped the box open. Inside sat a vintage brooch, encrusted with diamonds and sapphires, shaped like a falcon. It was exquisite. It looked like it belonged in a museum. "Yeah, right," Patricia scoffed, peering over the counter. "Like you can afford that. That's probably glass. Or you snatched it from a jewelry store downtown. I'm calling the airport police. This is grand larceny." Patricia picked up the phone at the gate desk. "Operations? This is gate A12. I have 2 suspects in custody. High-level fraud, possible theft of high-value goods. Send the police, and tell the pilot to offload their luggage from the hold." She hung up and looked at Marcus with a sneer that curdled the air. "Game over. You thought you could trick me. I've been working this gate for 15 years. I can spot a fake from a mile away." Marcus looked at his watch. He sighed, a sound of deep disappointment. 15 years, he repeated. "And in all that time, you never learned to look at the passenger manifest properly?" "I don't need to look at the manifest to know you don't belong in seat 1A, Patricia spat. "Actually," a deep voice boomed from the jet bridge door behind Patricia. "He does." Patricia spun around. The pilot, Captain Reynolds, was standing there. He looked furious. "Patricia, what in God's name is going on? We are 20 minutes past departure time. Why is Mr. Sterling not on board?" "Captain," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a sycophantic whine. "I caught them. These 2 are frauds. Stolen tickets, fake passports. I'm protecting the flight." Captain Reynolds looked at Marcus, then at the mess on the floor. His face went pale. He didn't look at Marcus like a criminal. He looked at him like he was royalty. "Patricia," the captain hissed, "do you know who this is?" "A scammer," she insisted, though her confidence wavered slightly. "This is Marcus Sterling," the captain said, his voice trembling slightly. "He owns the holding company that bought our airline last week." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence descended on Gate A12. Patricia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus, the man in the wool sweater, the man she had just accused of being a drug dealer, the man whose wife's bag was dumped on the floor. "He owns the airline," Patricia whispered. Marcus brushed a speck of dust from his sleeve. "Technically, my private equity firm, Sterling Vanguard, acquired the majority stake on Tuesday. I was flying to Geneva to sign the final transition papers with the European regulators." Marcus looked at Patricia, his eyes cold as steel. "But it seems I have some personnel matters to attend to first." Patricia's face turned a sickly shade of grey, but before she could stammer an apology, before she could try to backpedal, the situation escalated beyond corporate firing. The glass doors of the terminal entrance shattered inward, metaphorically speaking, as the real cavalry arrived. It wasn't the airport mall cops Patricia had called. Through the concourse, moving in a diamond formation, came 6 men in heavy tactical gear, wearing jackets emblazoned with Secret Service and diplomatic security. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. The lead agent, a man with a buzz cut and a face carved from granite, marched straight toward the gate. He didn't look at Patricia. He didn't look at the captain. He looked at the security guard, Brock, who was still holding Elena's jewelry box. "Federal agents," the lead agent barked, drawing a weapon and keeping it at low ready. "Step away from the protectee. Drop the item. Now!" Brock panicked, dropped the jewelry box. It clattered to the floor. I'm security." "Get on the ground," the agent screamed. "Face down, hands behind your head." 2 agents tackled Brock before he could even process the command. He hit the carpet hard, the wind knocked out of him. Handcuffs clicked instantly. Patricia shrieked, backing up against the wall. "I didn't do anything, I was just doing my job." The lead agent turned to Marcus. His demeanor shifted instantly from aggression to deference. He holstered his weapon and nodded respectfully. "Mr. Sterling." "Madam Sterling. Agent Miller, identifying. We received a distress signal from your biometric watch, indicating elevated heart rate and a potential hostile engagement. Are you injured?" The crowd gasped again. Biometric watch distress signal? Who were these people? Marcus adjusted his cuffs, looking down at Patricia, who was now trembling so violently her knees were knocking together. "I am fine, Agent Miller," Marcus said calmly. "However, my wife has been assaulted, our property has been seized without cause, and we have been illegally detained by these 2 individuals." Agent Miller turned his gaze to Patricia. It was a look that promised federal prison time. "Assault on a diplomatic envoy," Miller said, his voice flat. "That's a federal felony. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The transformation of Gate A12 from a mundane airport waiting area to a high-security federal crime scene happened in seconds. The silence that had fallen over the crowd when Agent Miller identified himself was replaced by a low, frantic murmur of disbelief. Smartphones were held aloft like lighters at a concert, recording every second of Patricia's unraveling. Patricia stood, pressed against the wall, her face a mask of shock that was slowly cracking into terror. Her hands were twisted behind her back, handcuffed by a junior agent who treated her with the same sterile efficiency one might use to bag evidence. "This is a mistake!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking. "I am the lead gate agent. You can't arrest me. I was stopping a security threat." Agent Miller ignored her completely. He was busy speaking into a wrist microphone, his eyes scanning the mezzanine level above them for potential threats. "Secure the perimeter. I want the concourse cleared from gate A10 to A14. No civilians within 50 yards. Get local PD to handle crowd control. We are moving the protectee to a secure location." "Secure location?" Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but authoritative. "Agent Miller, I have a flight to catch. I intend to board this plane." Miller turned, his expression softening slightly. "Sir, with respect, there has been a security breach. We need to vet the entire flight crew and manifest now that your cover is potentially compromised. Standard protocol for a Class A diplomat." "I am retired, Miller," Marcus said, though he allowed a small smile. "Mostly." "Once an envoy, always a target, sir," Miller replied. "Especially when you're the man who negotiated the Cobalt Treaty. There are people in Eastern Europe who would pay a lot of money to know you're standing in JFK without a detail." The crowd caught snippets of this. Cobalt Treaty? Class A diplomat? The live stream comments were scrolling so fast they were unreadable. The narrative was shifting in real time. This wasn't just a racial profiling incident anymore. It was an international incident. Meanwhile, on the floor, Officer Brock was groaning. "My shoulder. I think you dislocated my shoulder." "You're lucky that's all that's dislocated," the agent holding him down muttered. "You put your hands on the wife of a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient. You better pray she doesn't press charges, or you'll be in Leavenworth until the next century." Suddenly the crowd parted again, but this time it wasn't for tactical agents. It was for a frantic-looking man in a cheap suit, sprinting down the concourse, flanked by two breathless airport police officers. It was the airport director, Mr. Henderson. He skidded to a halt in front of the gate, his face pale and sweaty. He looked at the Secret Service agents, then at Marcus Sterling, and finally at his employee, Patricia, in handcuffs. "What is happening here?" Henderson gasped, trying to regain some authority. "Who is in charge?" Agent Miller stepped forward, towering over the director. "Special Agent Miller, Diplomatic Security Service. This is an active federal investigation involving the unlawful detention and assault of a protected person." "Who are you?" "I'm Henderson, Terminal Director," he stammered. He looked at Marcus. "Mr. Sterling? I had no idea you were flying with us today. If you had known, you would have treated me with respect." Marcus finished for him, raising an eyebrow. "Is that how it works, Mr. Henderson? Respect is reserved only for those on a VIP list? Everyone else gets treated like a criminal by your staff?" Henderson swallowed hard. "No, sir, of course not. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Elena spoke up. She had retrieved her scarf and was dusting it off, her demeanor regaining its regal composure. "Your guard dumped my personal belongings on the floor. Your agent called my husband a drug dealer. That is not a misunderstanding, Mr. Henderson. That is a systemic failure." Patricia, seeing her boss, found a sudden surge of desperate hope. "Mr. Henderson, tell them. I was following protocol. The system flagged them. I was just doing what the algorithm said." Henderson looked at Patricia with a mix of pity and fury. "Patricia, shut up! I won't!" she screamed, tears now streaming down her face. "The tickets were flagged. It said, 'Manual check required.' I have the screen right here." She gestured with her head toward the computer terminal at the desk. Marcus looked at Agent Miller. "Agent, secure that computer. If she claims the system flagged us, I want to know why. My team purchased those tickets directly through the airline's corporate liaison." Miller nodded to a tech specialist on his team. "Pull the logs. Now." The tech agent moved behind the counter, pushing aside the trembling Summit Airways junior staff who had been watching in horror. He plugged a device into the terminal, lines of code reflected in his sunglasses. "Well?" Marcus asked, crossing his arms. The tech agent frowned. He tapped a few keys. Then he looked up, a confused expression on his face. "Sir, the tickets weren't flagged by the airline's automated security system," the agent reported. "The manual check flag was added locally." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Locally?" "Yes, sir," the agent continued, pointing at the screen. "It was added 3 minutes before you arrived at the gate. From this terminal. User ID, P.O. Rayleigh." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Everyone turned to look at Patricia O'Reilly. "You flagged the tickets yourself," Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. "You created the problem so you could solve it." Patricia's face went white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "Why?" Elena asked, genuinely baffled. "Why would you do that?" It was the pilot, Captain Reynolds, who spoke up from the doorway of the jet bridge. He had been watching the scene unfold, and now a look of dawn realization crossed his face. "The upgrade list," Reynolds said softly. Everyone looked at the captain. "Patricia manages the upgrade list," Reynolds explained, stepping forward. "If the resident seats, the 2 most expensive seats on the plane, are empty, or if the passengers are no-shows or denied boarding, those seats become available for discretionary upgrades." Marcus looked at Patricia, understanding dawning on him. "You wanted to kick us off so you could give our seats to someone else?" "Not just give," Agent Miller surmised, his eyes cold. "Sell. We see this in fraud cases all the time. Gate agents taking cash bribes under the table to bump friends or high-paying illicit flyers into first class. Patricia, who is waiting in the wings for those seats." Patricia started to sob. "I didn't take money, just a favor." "Check the standby list," Miller ordered the tech agent. The agent tapped a key. 2 names added to the standby list 10 minutes ago, Mr. and Mrs. DeLuca. A heavy-set man in a flashy tracksuit, who had been hovering near the back of the line, trying to look inconspicuous, suddenly turned and tried to walk away briskly. "Grab him," Miller said effortlessly. 2 agents intercepted the man in the tracksuit. "I don't know her," the man shouted. "I just wanted an upgrade." "And how much did you pay her?" Marcus asked, stepping closer to the man. $2,000, the man blurted out, terrified of the federal agents. "She said if I gave her $2,000 cash, she'd bounce the people in 1A and 1B. Said they were nobodies, who wouldn't fight back." The revelation hung in the air like toxic smoke. Patricia hadn't just profiled them. She had actively framed them to run a grift. She had looked at Marcus and Eleanor, judged them based on their race and quiet demeanor, and decided they were easy victims for her scam. "You targeted us," Marcus said, his voice shaking with controlled rage, "because you thought we didn't belong. You thought we were weak." He stepped closer to Patricia, who cowered against the wall. "You're about to learn, Patricia, that you have made the most expensive mistake of your life." The airport police had cordoned off a section of the terminal, turning the nearby VIP lounge into a makeshift holding and interrogation center. The passengers of flight SA-409 were told boarding would be delayed by an hour. Surprisingly, nobody complained. They were too busy posting the videos that were now trending #1 worldwide on X, formerly Twitter. Inside the lounge, Marcus and Elena sat on plush leather sofas, sipping sparkling water brought to them by a terrified flight attendant. Agent Miller stood guard by the door. Patricia and Brock were in separate corners of the room, seated on folding chairs, still handcuffed. Officer Brock looked deflated, his macho facade completely dissolved. Patricia just stared at the floor, muttering to herself. "Mr. Sterling," Agent Miller said, touching his earpiece. "Your counsel has arrived, and the CEO of Summit Airways is on the line." "Put the CEO on speaker," Marcus said, "and send the lawyer in." The doors opened, and a woman walked in who looked sharper than a razor blade. She was tall, wearing a tailored Navy power suit and carrying a briefcase that looked like it cost more than Patricia's car. This was Evelyn Vance, senior partner at Vance, Sterling and Moore. She was known in legal circles as the Guillotine. "Marcus, Elena," Evelyn said, nodding briskly. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She looked at the two detainees. "Are these the defendants?" "They are," Marcus said. Agent Miller placed a conference phone on the table. "Mr. Sterling, you have Richard Thorne, CEO of Summit Airways." "Marcus!" The voice on the phone was frantic. "Marcus, I am so sorry. I'm in London. I just saw the videos. This is a catastrophe. I am firing them both immediately. We will issue a public apology within the hour. Please tell me you aren't pulling the acquisition." Marcus leaned forward toward the phone. "Richard, you know I don't make business decisions based on emotion. The acquisition stands." A sigh of relief audible from London. "Thank God." "However," Marcus continued, his voice hardening, "I am making a personnel decision. Effective immediately, I want a complete audit of every gate agent at JFK. If this woman felt comfortable doing this to me, she has done it to others. I want to know who else she has defrauded, who else she has profiled, and who else she has humiliated." "Done," Richard said instantly. "We'll bring in forensic accountants. We'll turn the place upside down." "And Richard," Marcus added, "I want you to listen to what happens next. Don't hang up." Marcus nodded to Evelyn. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. She walked over to Patricia. "Ms. O'Reilly," Evelyn began, her voice crisp, "I represent Mr. Sterling. But right now, I'm going to give you a preview of your future." Patricia looked up, eyes red. "I lost my job. I get it." "Oh, you think this ends with unemployment?" Evelyn laughed, a cold, dry sound. "That is adorable. Let me explain the concept of hard karma to you." Evelyn held up a finger. 1. Federal charges. You falsified security data to facilitate wire fraud. That falls under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You also conspired to commit larceny by taking a bribe. Since this occurred in an international airport, that is federal jurisdiction. My friends at the Southern District of New York, the SDNY, are already drafting the indictment. You're looking at 10 to 15 years in prison." Patricia gasped, a strangled sound escaping her throat. 2, Evelyn continued, holding up a second finger. "Civil litigation. We are suing you personally for defamation of character, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil rights violations. We will attach a lien to your home, your car, and your future wages. You will never own anything again. Any penny you make for the rest of your life will go to a charity of Mr. Sterling's choosing." "I have a pension," Patricia whispered, weaky. 15 years. "Gone," Evelyn said simply. Under the faithless servant doctrine in New York labor law, an employee who engages in fraud and criminal misconduct against their employer forfeits all compensation earned during the period of disloyalty. Summit Airways will claw back every salary dollar and pension credit you accrued while you were running this scam. You are leaving here with 0. Patricia slumped forward, putting her head in her hands. The reality was setting in. It wasn't just a bad day. It was the end of her life as she knew it. Evelyn turned to Brock. The security guard flinched. "And you," Evelyn said, looking at him like he was a stain on the carpet. "Mr. Brock, you are a contractor, correct? Private security firm." "Yeah," Brock grunted. I was just following her orders. Following orders is not a defense for assault, Evelyn corrected. We checked your record while I was in the car. It seems you were discharged from the NYPD 6 years ago for excessive force. You managed to keep your security license by burying that file. Brock's eyes widened. How did you— We know everything, Evelyn said. Mr. Sterling has resources you cannot comprehend. We are going to ensure your security license is permanently revoked in all 50 states. You won't be able to get a job guarding a mall kiosk. And like Ms. O'Reilly, you will be facing assault charges. The Secret Service takes a very dim view of people who touch their protectees. Marcus stood up. He walked over to the two of them. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He looked at them with a profound sadness. You had power, Marcus said quietly. A tiny amount of power. A badge. A computer login. And instead of using it to help people, or just to do your job, you used it to hurt people you thought were beneath you. He looked at Patricia. You judged me by the color of my skin and the clothes on my back. You thought I was nobody, but even if I was nobody, even if I was just a grandfather visiting his family, did I deserve to be humiliated? Did my wife deserve to have her things thrown on the floor? Patricia didn't answer. She couldn't. That is why you are going to jail, Marcus said. Not because I am rich, but because you are cruel, and cruelty must be answered. The door to the lounge opened. 4 NYPD officers entered, followed by 2 federal marshals. All right, one of the marshals said. O'Reilly, Brock, you're coming with us. Federal processing. As they were hauled up, Patricia looked at Marcus one last time. Please, she begged. I have kids. Then you should have set a better example for them, Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. As Patricia and Brock were led out of the lounge, the reality of the public spectacle awaited them. They had to walk back through the terminal to get to the police cruisers. It was a walk of shame of biblical proportions. The delay of flight SA-409 meant that hundreds of passengers were still there, and the crowd had grown. People from other gates had wandered over, drawn by the news on social media. As Patricia was marched out in handcuffs, flanked by federal marshals, the terminal erupted. It wasn't cheering exactly. It was a roar of vindication. Flashbulbs popped. Phones recorded. That's her, someone shouted. That's the racist lady. Enjoy prison, another voice yelled. Patricia kept her head down, shielding her face with her shoulder, but she couldn't hide. Her name was already trending. Her face was on CNN in the airport bars. The video of her sneering at Marcus was playing on a loop on the news monitors above her own head. The irony was brutal. The technology she had tried to abuse, the surveillance, the systems, had turned on her. Back at Gate A12, the atmosphere had shifted from tension to celebration. Agent Miller and his team were conducting a final sweep of the jet bridge. Marcus and Elena stood at the counter, where a new gate agent, a young woman who was trembling with nervousness, was printing new boarding passes. I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling, the young agent said, her hands shaking. Here are your passes. Seat 1A and 1B. We have also loaded a bottle of Dom Perignon, 2008 on ice for you. Thank you, my dear, Marcus said kindly. What is your name? Sarah, she whispered. Sarah, Marcus smiled. Relax. You are doing a fine job. Just treat everyone who comes to this counter the same, whether they are wearing a tuxedo or a tracksuit. That is all anyone asks. Yes, sir. Sarah beamed. As Marcus and Elena turned to board, the crowd in the waiting area spontaneously began to applaud. It started with a few claps from the young mother Patricia had yelled at earlier, and soon the whole gate was clapping. Marcus paused. He turned to the crowd and gave a small, humble wave. He wasn't doing it for the applause. He was acknowledging the witnesses, the people who had filmed, who had spoken up, who had refused to let the injustice happen in the dark. But the story wasn't quite over. There was one loose end. As they walked down the jet bridge, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a text from his chief of security back at the firm. Subject, the buyer. Message. We tracked the source of the cash the standby passenger used. The guy in the tracksuit who tried to buy your seat. He's a courier for the Verrazano crime family. They needed him out of the country fast. Patricia wasn't just taking a bribe, she was aiding a fugitive. Marcus stopped on the jet bridge. He showed the text to Eleanor. Eleanor's eyes widened. She was smuggling a mobster? Unknowingly, perhaps. Or maybe she didn't care, Marcus mused. But this adds a RICO charge to her list. She's not going away for 10 years, Elle. She's going away for life. Elena sighed, looking at the plane door. Karma isn't just a boomerang, Marcus. No, Marcus agreed, stepping into the aircraft where the flight attendants were waiting with anxious smiles. Sometimes it's a freight train. They settled into the residence. It was a private 3-room suite at the front of the A380. A living room, a bedroom with a double bed, and an ensuite shower. The luxury was immense, a stark contrast to the dirty airport carpet where Elena's jewelry had been dumped just an hour ago. Marcus sat in the leather armchair and accepted a glass of champagne. He watched out the window as a police van drove away across the tarmac, lights flashing. Inside that van was Patricia, watching her world dissolve through a wire mesh window. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked Elena, seeing her rub her wrist where Brock had grabbed the bag. "I am," Elena said, taking a sip of her drink. "But I'm thinking about that young girl, Sarah, the new agent." "What about her?" "She saw what happened today," Elena said. "She saw that being cruel has consequences, and she saw that dignity can win." Marcus nodded. "That is the real victory, not the lawsuit, not the arrest, but the lesson." The plane pushed back from the gate. The engines roared to life, a deep, powerful hum that vibrated through the floor. As the plane taxied, Marcus pulled out his tablet. He had one more email to write. This one was to the governor of New York. It was time to pull some strings to ensure that the investigation into the airport security vendor was thorough. He wasn't going to let them scapegoat just 2 people if the whole system was rotten. But before he could type, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Reynolds. We apologize for the delay. We had a security situation at the gate. But I am pleased to report that the safety of the flight has been secured, and we are cleared for departure to Geneva." The captain paused. "I would also like to welcome a very special guest on board today. A man who reminded us all this morning that character is defined by actions, not appearance. Welcome aboard, Mr. Sterling." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "He's laying it on a bit thick." "Enjoy it?" Elena smiled, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "You saved the day, Z07. "I just wanted to go to Geneva," Marcus grumbled playfully. But as the plane lifted off, soaring over the sprawl of Queens and banking over the Atlantic Ocean, Marcus knew it wasn't just about Geneva. It was about the message sent. However, the hard karma had one final twist in store for the antagonists, one that would be revealed when they landed. The wheels of justice grind slowly, but as the old proverb says, they grind exceedingly fine. For Patricia O'Reilly and Officer Brock, the year following the incident at Gate A12 was not a slow grind. It was a dissection. 12 months later, the Federal District Court in Manhattan was packed. The media interest hadn't waned. If anything, it had intensified. The Sterling incident, as it was now called in legal textbooks, had become a landmark case regarding consumer rights, racial profiling, and aviation security. Patricia sat at the defense table. She looked 20 years older. Her hair, once dyed a fierce blonde and sprayed into a helmet, was now grey and limp, pulled back into a messy bun. She wore a beige prison jumpsuit, having been denied bail due to the flight risk associated with her accidental connection to the Verrazano crime syndicate. Her lawyer, a weary public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, was shuffling papers with a sense of doom. Across the aisle, the prosecution team sat confident and poised. And in the gallery, sitting in the front row, were Marcus and Elena Sterling. They didn't have to be there. They had already won the civil lawsuit 3 months prior, a judgment of $4.5 million for defamation and emotional distress, a sum that ensured Patricia would be in debt for 3 lifetimes. But Marcus had insisted on coming to the sentencing. Why? Elena had asked him that morning. Because, Marcus had replied, fixing his tie in the mirror. She needs to see that we are still standing. She needs to see that her hate didn't break us. Judge Harrison, a stern woman known for her zero-tolerance policy on corruption, banged her gavel. The room went silent. Patricia O'Reilly, the judge began, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. You stand before this court convicted of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit larceny, and civil rights violations. But your crimes go beyond the statutes. Patricia trembled, tears leaking from her eyes. She looked back at the gallery, hoping to see her husband. But the seat was empty. Her husband had filed for divorce 2 weeks after the arrest, unable to handle the public shame and the seizure of their assets. Her children, bullied relentlessly at school because their mother was the airport Karen from the viral videos, had moved to another state with their father. She was utterly alone. You held a position of trust, the judge continued. You were the gatekeeper, and you used that gate to exact a petty, prejudiced tyranny. You profiled Marcus and Elena Sterling, not because they were a security threat, but because their excellence offended your mediocrity. The judge adjusted her glasses. Furthermore, your greed inadvertently aided a known fugitive. While the court acknowledges you didn't know the specific identity of the man in the tracksuit, your willingness to bypass federal security protocols for a bribe created a national security risk. That is unforgivable. I'm sorry, Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. I just want to go home. You don't have a home, Ms. O'Reilly, the judge said coldly. The bank has foreclosed on your property to satisfy the civil judgment. Your sentence is as follows. The courtroom held its breath. On the count of wire fraud, 5 years. On the civil rights violations, 3 years. On the conspiracy charge, 4 years. These sentences are to run consecutively. Patricia let out a guttural sob. 12 years. She would be 60 years old when she got out. And, the judge added, delivering the final blow, you are hereby permanently placed on the federal no-fly list. You will never step foot in an airport again. Not to work. Not to travel. You are grounded, Ms. O'Reilly. Permanently. As the marshals hauled Patricia away, she looked at Marcus. There was no defiance left in her eyes, only a hollow, crushing regret. Marcus met her gaze with a stoic expression. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply watched her disappear through the side door, a ghost of her former self. The fate of the muscle officer, Brock, didn't fare much better. While his prison sentence was shorter, 3 years for assault and obstruction of justice, his life outside was equally ruined. Because of his law enforcement background, Brock couldn't be placed in the general population at the federal penitentiary. He would have been killed by the inmates. He was placed in protective custody, essentially solitary confinement, for 23 hours a day. He lost his pension. He lost his truck. But the hardest hit came from the civil side. Evelyn Vance, Marcus's ruthlessly efficient lawyer, had discovered that Brock had been moonlighting as a security consultant without a license. She had tipped off the IRS. By the time Brock was released, he would owe the government over $200,000 in back taxes and penalties. The man who had sneered at Marcus, calling him a scammer, was now legally destitute. 1 year later, a documentary crew would track Brock down for a "Where Are They Now?" special. They found him working under the table at a scrap metal yard in New Jersey, hauling rusted radiators in the freezing rain. When the reporter asked him, "Do you regret what you did to Mr. Sterling?" Brock didn't bluster or brag. He just looked at the camera, his eyes dead and tired, and said, "I regret waking up that morning. I regret everything." The legacy of dignity. While the lives of their tormentors crumbled into dust, Marcus and Eleanor Sterling turned their experience into something luminous. They didn't keep the $4.5 million judgment money. To do so would have felt dirty, like profiting from their own humiliation. Instead, they added $5 million of their own money to it and established the Open Gates Foundation. The foundation had a dual purpose: providing legal defense for travelers who were victims of racial profiling and funding scholarships for minority students entering the fields of aviation and aerospace engineering. 1 year to the day of the incident, Marcus and Elena stood in the atrium of the very same airport, JFK Terminal 4. But this time, they weren't being stopped by security. They were being honored. A massive new mural had been unveiled on the wall near Gate A12. It depicted a diverse group of travelers looking up at the sky, with the words, "Dignity has no borders," painted in gold leaf. The CEO of Summit Airways, Richard Thorne, stood at the podium. "We made a mistake a year ago," Thorne told the assembled press. "A terrible mistake. But thanks to the grace and leadership of Marcus and Elena Sterling, we have transformed our company culture. Today, Summit Airways is proud to be the industry leader in equity and inclusion training." Marcus stepped up to the microphone. He looked older, perhaps a bit more tired, but his strength was undeniable. "We do not seek revenge," Marcus said, his voice booming through the terminal without a hint of the tremor that had shaken him that day a year ago. "Revenge is a circle. It feeds on itself. We seek change." He looked at the crowd and spotted Sarah, the young gate agent who had printed their boarding passes after Patricia's arrest. She was now a supervisor, wearing a gold pin on her lapel. Marcus smiled at her, and she beamed back. "There will always be people who try to close the gate," Marcus continued. "People who think they own the keys to the world. But they forget one thing." He paused, looking directly into the camera lenses that were broadcasting his face to the world. "The world belongs to those who build bridges, not those who build walls. The gate is open. Walk through it with your head high." The final twist. Later that evening, as Marcus and Eleanor relaxed in their penthouse overlooking Central Park, a news report flashed on the television. Breaking news: major crackdown on the Verrazano crime family. Following a year-long investigation triggered by a failed smuggling attempt at JFK Airport, the FBI has indicted the entire leadership of the syndicate. The reporter continued, showing a flowchart of the crime family. Sources say the breakthrough came when a low-level courier, arrested at the airport while trying to buy a first-class seat, turned state's witness. The courier provided the encryption keys to the family's offshore accounts. Marcus took a sip of his tea and chuckled softly. "What is it?" Elena asked, looking up from her book. "Do you realize what this means?" Marcus pointed at the screen. "If Patricia hadn't tried to sell our seats if she had just let us board, that courier would have gotten on the next flight unnoticed. He would have escaped with the encryption keys." Elena's mouth dropped open. So her greed took down the entire mob, Marcus finished. She wanted to destroy us, Elena. Instead, she destroyed herself, destroyed a crime syndicate, and helped us start a charity that will help thousands of people. Elena shook her head in disbelief. God works in mysterious ways. Indeed, Marcus replied, turning off the TV. And sometimes he uses a gate agent named Patricia to get the job done. They sat in the quiet luxury of their home, the city lights twinkling below them like diamonds. They had faced the ugliness of the world and met it with grace. They had been stopped at the gate, but they had arrived at a destination far greater than they ever planned. And somewhere in a cold, concrete cell, Patricia O'Reilly stared at the ceiling, wondering how a woman who thought she held all the power had ended up with absolutely nothing. The karma hadn't just hit back, it had reshaped the world. This story serves as a powerful reminder that prejudice is not just morally wrong. It is a dangerous blindness. Patricia and Brock were so blinded by their biases that they couldn't see the reality standing right in front of them. That dignity and power often walk in quiet shoes. They mistook humility for weakness, and it cost them their freedom. Justice in this story wasn't just about punishment, it was about revelation. The hard karma wasn't just prison. It was the total dismantling of their egos and the accidental good that came from their evil intentions. Marcus and Elena proved that true power isn't about shouting or bullying. It's about knowing who you are and standing your ground when the world tries to push you down. Wow, talk about instant karma. Patricia thought she was the hunter, but she ended up being the prey in her own trap. What did you think of Marcus's reaction? Would you have been that calm, or would you have lost it? If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter what they wear or look like, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories with more people. And hey, have you ever dealt with a Patricia in real life? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always flies first class.